go back 18 years because I think a lot of people don't really know what were the safety measures that were in place at that time when 9/11 hit. Because I think it's important that we go back a bit.
Well, I think as we look back at 9/11 and 18 years ago with the horrific attack on U.S. soil, it's important for us to learn the lessons and how this kind of attack could have occurred in the first place. That's why we held a hearing of the Senate Homeland Security Committee in New York on Monday, heard testimony from former secretaries of the Department of Homeland Security. And certainly we did learn a great deal about some inadequacies of Homeland Security at that time. Probably first and foremost was a lack of intelligence sharing, that there was some indications that a plot was underway, but there wasn't adequate sharing of that information across government agencies. We also know we need to have more security at airports as we have today, that you have to also harden some of these sites to make it more difficult for a terrorist to penetrate it. So it's all of those lessons we have been implementing over the last 18 years. But perhaps our biggest challenge right now is that the threats that we faced 18 years ago are very different today. We still have a dangerous world, but the types of attacks that we have against Americans have changed, and we have to continually adapt to these new threats.
Absolutely, and actually I have a strong interest in consumer stories, and I always wonder, does Homeland Security now look at kind of what's coming across, when it comes to technology, any type of terrorist threat through that?
The rapidly changing technology certainly is something that has to be addressed by the Department of Homeland Security, and folks who want to do us harm are using new technologies. I will say, if you look at the threat environment right now, probably our most significant threat to the homeland comes in the area of cyber. Cybersecurity is absolutely essential. We have to harden our cybersecurity force. The United States is continually attacked through cyber activity by foreign governments, as well as highly sophisticated criminal organizations as well, some of those organizations in the United States. So we have to have very robust cybersecurity, something we didn't have 18 years ago, but now has to be at the top of the list.
Absolutely. Now that we're 18 years later, what are some of the things that you and Congress and everyone in Homeland Security, what are some of those steps that you all are taking to better keep us protected?
Well, probably one of the most important things is to make sure we're putting resources into the threats that are most significant. Cybersecurity is an absolutely huge threat to our country. We've got to continually harden that. We've been working across the Department of Homeland Security, but also working with the Department of Defense and actively engaging private industry as well, so that we have a whole of government and really a whole of the economy approach to how do we make ourselves more secure against cyber attacks. But also the other thing that we have to consider is that terrorism has also changed. Certainly 9/11 was an attack by foreign terrorists on U.S. soil. But what we have seen since that time is primarily domestic terrorism conducted by folks within our country. And we've particularly seen the rise of white supremacists. The white supremacy is a movement not just in this country, but we're seeing in other countries around the world. And many of the attacks that we have seen on our soil are by white supremacists and the rise of that movement. We have to do everything in our power to stop that. We have to use intelligence, and law enforcement has to be actively engaged in that endeavor. We're going to be holding some hearings specifically on that topic within my committee, the Homeland Security Committee.
Do you think, from these hearings and from all these meetings, do you think new laws will be created to do that?
Sometimes you need new legislation in order to deal with evolving threats, although I think also we just have to make sure the Department of Homeland Security has the proper authorizations to adapt. Really what you have to do in a situation that changes very rapidly, you have to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security has the flexibility to adapt to the threats, has the resources that they can move depending on where those threats are. So oftentimes it's not new legislation, but it is a highly dynamic Department of Homeland Security that has the ability to adapt quickly to a rapidly changing threat environment.
Absolutely. And I think as everyone's watching these, videos and pictures, everything that's posted on social media today and on TV, I think a lot of people, the question, comes across their mind as, gosh, could something like 9/11 happen again of this magnitude in the United States? And as someone who is working closely and working on this kind of stuff, do you think it could happen again?
Well, we always have to be prepared. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that a horrific event like what happened on 9/11 never happens again. I think it's telling that we haven't had that type of attack over the last 18 years, which means folks have been focused on that threat. But we can never let our guard down. That's the most important lesson, I believe, from 9/11, is that there are people that want to do harm to Americans. We can never let our guard down, and we have to always be prepared. And it's important that folks remember 9/11 because at some point this will become more of a history lesson as a new generation grows up and doesn't have the same personal experiences that I had and every other American who was alive during the attack and knows exactly where they were when that happened and the events. It's seared into our memories. The next generation doesn't have it seared into their memories. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure everybody remembers and remembers what happens when you let your guard down. And when we remember, we will take steps to make sure we protect this country from that sort of an attack and it never happens again.
I have to ask, just because I'm sure you heard some amazing things in these testimonies, and was there anything that really stood out? When you heard it, it kind of made you, jump back a little bit.
Are you talking about from the secretaries?
Yeah, from the hearings. I'm always curious as to what kind of sticks out in everyone's minds when they're sitting in on these hearings, and what kind of makes you think like, oh gosh, I really didn't know that, or that's kind of shocking.
Well, I think what I heard really confirmed some areas that I've been working on is that I'm certainly concerned about evolving threats. We're looking at potential biological attacks against the United States, chemical attacks, but particularly in the area of biological terrorism. It's a rapidly evolving area, and it's one that we really have to focus our attention on. And it's something that the secretaries raised as a place where we need to put more attention.